The Varkan Empire had conquered 17 galaxies. Their warships darkened the skies of countless worlds. Their generals had never tasted defeat. Their emperor, Zolthrax, the Eternal, sat upon a throne made from the bones of dead civilizations. He was ancient. He was powerful. He was bored. So when his scouts discovered a small blue planet spinning quietly in a forgotten corner of the Milky Way, he saw an opportunity for entertainment. The planet was called Earth. Its inhabitants called themselves humans. They had primitive technology. They fought wars among themselves. They had not even colonized their own moon properly. Zolthrax laughed when he received the report. His advisors laughed with him. The entire royal court found it amusing that such weak creatures existed. They decided to make an example of Earth. They would crush it slowly. They would broadcast the destruction to every corner of the known universe. It would remind all civilizations of Varkan supremacy. The emperor assembled his finest fleet, 3,000 warships. Each one carried weapons that could crack a planet in half. Each one held soldiers who had slaughtered millions without mercy. The fleet commander was Admiral Krix, a legendary warrior who had personally destroyed 200 worlds. Admiral Krix was not excited about this mission. He considered it beneath his dignity. Attacking Earth was like using a mountain to crush an insect. But the emperor had commanded, so Krix obeyed. He gathered his fleet at the edge of the solar system and prepared for the invasion. The humans detected them immediately. Their primitive satellites picked up the massive energy signatures. Their governments went into panic mode. Military leaders from every nation gathered in emergency meetings. Scientists tried to analyze the alien technology. Religious leaders declared it was the end of days. But something strange happened in those final hours. The humans stopped fighting each other. Old enemies shook hands. Ancient conflicts were put aside. Every nation contributed what they could. Every scientist shared their knowledge. Every soldier stood ready to defend their home. Admiral Krix found this behavior puzzling. In his experience, primitive species tore themselves apart when faced with extinction. They betrayed each other. They fought for survival at any cost. But these humans were doing the opposite. They were uniting. It did not matter, Krix told himself. Unity could not stop plasma cannons. Courage could not deflect nuclear torpedoes. The humans were dead. They just did not know it yet. The fleet entered Earth's orbit on a Tuesday morning. 3,000 ships blocked out the sun. Shadows fell across entire continents. People looked up at the sky and saw death staring back at them. Admiral Krix broadcast a message to the planet. He gave the humans 1 hour to surrender. He expected them to beg. He expected them to cry. He expected them to offer their leaders as sacrifices. Instead, they sent back a single reply. It was a human word that Krix's translators struggled to interpret. The closest translation was this, a suggestion that the admiral should perform a physically impossible act upon himself. The message also included an image of a raised middle finger. Krix was confused at first. Then he was amused. Then he was angry. No species had ever defied the Varkan Empire so boldly. These primitive apes would pay for their insults. He ordered the bombardment to begin. The first wave of plasma bolts rained down upon Earth's major cities. Krix watched his display screens, waiting to see the explosions, waiting to see the destruction, waiting to see the fires. But something was wrong. The bolts were disappearing before they reached the surface. They were being absorbed by some kind of energy field. The field was invisible. It should not have existed. Earth's technology was too primitive to create such defenses. Krix ordered more weapons to fire. Torpedoes launched by the hundreds. Missiles streaked toward the planet. Energy beams cut through space at light speed. All of them vanished. The admiral felt the first cold touch of fear. He had studied Earth extensively. He knew their capabilities. They could barely travel to their own moon. They could barely manage their own climate. How could they stop weapons that had destroyed empires? He demanded answers from his science officers. They ran scans. They analyzed data. They checked their instruments again and again. Finally, they came to him with trembling voices. The humans had built something hidden beneath their oceans, something buried deep in their mountains, something spread across their entire planet in a network so complex that Varkan sensors had missed it completely. The humans called it the Last Wall. They had been building it for 50 years, in secret, in silence. Nations that hated each other had cooperated on this single project. Scientists who competed for fame had shared their discoveries freely. Governments that distrusted each other had contributed resources without question. They had known the aliens were coming. They had detected the Varkan scouts years ago. They had pretended to be ignorant. They had pretended to be weak. They had played the part of primitive apes perfectly. Admiral Krix realized that he had made a terrible mistake. He had underestimated these creatures. He had assumed that because they fought among themselves, they could not stand together. He had assumed that because their technology seemed primitive, they could not innovate. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The Last Wall did more than protect. It absorbed energy. It stored that energy. And now, after drinking in the firepower of 3,000 warships, it was full. A pulse of light erupted from Earth's surface. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It spread outward in a perfect sphere, moving faster than anything should be able to move. Krix had 1 second to feel surprise. Then the pulse hit his ship. Every system failed at once. Engines died. Weapons went cold. Life support sputtered and stopped. Across the entire fleet, 3,000 warships went dark. Admiral Crix floated in the sudden silence of his dead ship. His crew drifted past him, unconscious or dying. His empire's greatest fleet had been reduced to metal coffins orbiting an insignificant planet. He had underestimated the humans. He would not make that mistake again. But he would never get the chance, because the humans were not done yet. From the surface of Earth, small ships began to rise. They were ugly compared to Varkan vessels. They were rough and unpolished, but they moved with purpose. They moved with hunger. The humans were coming, and they were angry. The human boarding parties cut through Varkan hulls like knives through water. They wore suits of black armor that moved like liquid metal. They carried weapons that made no sound but left enemies as ash. They worked in perfect coordination, sweeping through corridors and securing critical systems. Admiral Crix watched from his command deck as his soldiers fell. Varkan warriors were legendary throughout the galaxies. They trained from birth for combat. They feared nothing. They had crushed armies that outnumbered them by the thousands. The humans killed them anyway. It was not just their weapons, it was how they fought. They adapted instantly. They learned from every encounter. If a tactic worked once, they improved it. If a tactic failed, they abandoned it without hesitation. They communicated without speaking. They moved as one organism with many bodies. Crix had never seen anything like it. His species had conquered worlds by being stronger, by being better armed, by being more numerous. The humans were none of these things, but they were something else. They were creative. A Varkan soldier would follow orders perfectly. He would execute his training exactly as taught. He would fight the way his ancestors had fought for 1,000,000 years. A human soldier would improvise. She would use the environment as a weapon. She would turn enemy equipment against its owners. She would find solutions that no training manual could predict. Within 6 hours, the humans controlled 500 Varkan ships. They captured crew members alive whenever possible. They took special care to preserve navigation data and communication logs. They wanted information. Crix understood then that surrender was his only option. His fleet was crippled. His soldiers were defeated. His only hope was to negotiate for his life. He sent a message to the human commanders. He offered conditional surrender. He offered to share Varkan technology. He offered to teach them everything about the galaxy. In exchange, he asked only for his freedom and the freedom of his surviving crew. The humans agreed. Crix felt relief wash over him. Perhaps these creatures were not so terrible after all. Perhaps they could be reasoned with. Perhaps the Varkan Empire could make them allies instead of enemies. He was escorted to a human vessel for negotiations. It was smaller than his own ship, but he noticed something that disturbed him. The walls were covered with markings. Names, he realized. Thousands of names. Millions of names. A human officer noticed his confusion. She explained calmly. These were the names of humans who had died in wars. Wars against each other. Wars that had shaped their species into what it was today. The humans had been fighting for their entire existence. They had fought ice ages. They had fought plagues. They had fought predators. They had fought each other. Every generation had faced extinction. Every generation had survived. Crix began to understand why his fleet had failed. The Varkan Empire had grown fat on easy victories. They had conquered weak species and called themselves strong. They had never faced a true challenge. The humans had never known anything else. A human general entered the room. His name was Marcus Chen. He was old for a human, with gray hair and deep lines on his face, but his eyes were sharp. His voice was steady. He looked at Crix the way a butcher might look at livestock. The negotiations began. Crix shared everything he knew about the galaxy. He told them about the Varkan Empire's territories. He told them about other alien civilizations. He told them about threats and opportunities and resources. The humans listened carefully. They asked intelligent questions. They took detailed notes. When Crix finished, General Chen thanked him politely. Then he explained what would happen next. The humans would keep the captured fleet. They would reverse engineer Varkan technology. They would use the navigation data to map the galaxy. They would contact other alien civilizations and offer them a choice. Join humanity, or face them. Crix protested. This was not the agreement. He had surrendered in exchange for freedom. He had cooperated fully. General Chen nodded. The agreement would be honored. Crix and his crew would be released. They would be given a single ship with enough fuel to reach Varkan territory, but they would carry a message. The message was simple. Earth was no longer interested in isolation. Earth was no longer content to watch the galaxy from afar. Earth was coming, and the galaxy should prepare. Crix asked what would happen if the Varkan Empire refused to accept this new reality. What if they sent another fleet, a larger fleet? What if they brought their full military might against this small blue planet? General Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. He told Crix a story. Long ago, humans had lived in caves. They had been weak and small. They had been prey for larger animals, but they had learned to use fire. They had learned to make tools. They had learned to hunt the hunters. One by one, the great predators had fallen. the saber-toothed cats, the giant bears, the massive wolves. All of them had been stronger than humans. All of them had been faster. All of them had been better suited for survival. None of them existed anymore. Humans did not fight fair. They did not follow rules. They did not accept limitations. When faced with a stronger enemy, they found weaknesses. When faced with a faster enemy, they built traps. When faced with impossible odds, they changed the odds. General Chen leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper. The Varkan Empire had conquered 17 galaxies. They had destroyed countless civilizations. They had built an army that stretched across the stars. Humanity had something better. They had rage. The rage of a species that had clawed its way up from mud and blood. The rage of a species that had survived ice ages and asteroid impacts and nuclear weapons. The rage of a species that had been alone in the universe for millions of years, dreaming of the stars, waiting for their chance. That chance had arrived. Crix was released as promised. He took his ship and his surviving crew and fled toward Varkan territory. He carried the human message in his mind like a burning coal. Behind him, Earth's new fleet was growing. Captured Varkan ships were being repaired and improved. Human engineers were already making modifications that Varkan scientists had never imagined. The galaxy had awakened a monster, and that monster was hungry. Across the stars. News of the failed invasion spread. Other alien civilizations received the reports with disbelief. The mighty Varkan fleet had been defeated by primitives. Impossible, absurd. The reports must be exaggerated. They laughed at the humans. They mocked the Varkan Empire for losing to such inferior creatures. They posted jokes and memes across their communication networks. They did not understand what was coming, but they would learn soon. The Galactic Council met in emergency session for the first time in 3,000 years. Representatives from every major civilization gathered in the Great Chamber on Nexus Prime. They came from species that had mastered the stars long before Earth had even formed. They came with ancient wisdom and advanced technology. They came with absolute confidence in their superiority. The council president was High Arbiter Vexus, a being of pure energy who had governed for 8 centuries. She called the session to order and introduced the only item on the agenda, the human problem. Several representatives dismissed the issue immediately. The humans had gotten lucky against the Varkan fleet. It was a fluke, a temporary embarrassment for the Empire. The matter would resolve itself soon enough. Others were more concerned. They had studied the battle data. They had analyzed the human tactics. They had seen something that troubled them deeply. The humans had shown restraint. This confused the council. What did restraint have to do with anything? War was about destruction. Victory was about annihilation. The winner was whoever killed more efficiently. But the humans had captured ships instead of destroying them. They had taken prisoners instead of executing enemies. They had preserved technology instead of scorching it into atoms. They were not fighting like conquerors. They were fighting like collectors. A young representative from the Tholian collective raised a disturbing possibility. What if the humans were building something? What if they were gathering resources and knowledge for a larger purpose? What if the Varkan invasion had given them exactly what they needed to become a true galactic power? The council laughed at this suggestion. Humans were barely 1,000 years old as a technological civilization. They could not possibly threaten species that had traveled the stars for millions of years. The laughter stopped when the report came in. Humanity had made contact with the Drath, a small civilization near the border of Archon space. The Drath had been conquered by the Empire 2 centuries ago. They had been forced to pay tribute and provide soldiers for Varkan wars. The humans had offered them a different arrangement. Freedom in exchange for information. Technology in exchange for alliance. Friendship in exchange for loyalty. The Drath had accepted within a week. 3 other conquered species had joined the growing human alliance. Within a month, the number had grown to 20. The humans were not building an empire. They were building a coalition. Each new member brought different skills. The Velari were master shipbuilders. The Cronin were expert miners. The Zethani were brilliant scientists. The humans welcomed them all. They shared technology freely. They treated their allies as equals. This was unheard of in galactic politics. Powerful species did not share with weaker ones. They dominated. They exploited. They consumed. The humans broke every rule of interstellar relations. And somehow it worked. Admiral Crix delivered his message to the Varkan Emperor. Zolthrax listened in silence as his fleet commander described the defeat. He listened as Crix explained human tactics. He listened as his greatest warrior admitted he had been outmatched. Then the Emperor killed Crix for failing. Zolthrax assembled a new fleet. This one was 10 times larger than the first. 30,000 warships. The greatest military force ever gathered in Varkan history. He commanded it personally. The Emperor had conquered 17 galaxies. He had crushed rebellions that seemed unstoppable. He had destroyed civilizations that were far more advanced than humans. He would not fail again. The fleet launched toward Earth with terrible purpose. It moved like a storm front crossing the universe. Worlds trembled at its passage. Civilizations sent prayers to their gods. But when the fleet arrived at Earth, they found something unexpected. Earth was empty. The planet remained still blue and green and beautiful, but every human was gone. Every ship had vanished. Every trace of their new military had disappeared. The Varkans searched the entire solar system. They scanned every moon. They probed every asteroid. They found nothing but abandoned cities and silent machines. Zolthrax was furious. Where had the humans gone? How had they hidden an entire civilization? What trick were these primitives playing? The answer came from the opposite side of the galaxy. Humanity had attacked the Varkan homeworld while Zolthrax led his fleet toward Earth. The humans had taken a different path. They had used knowledge from captured navigation systems. They had traveled through routes the Varkan considered secret. They had crossed the galaxy in weeks instead of months. The Varkan homeworld was defenseless. Most military ships had joined the Emperor's fleet. Most soldiers had gone to destroy Earth. The planet held only civilians and bureaucrats, and the Emperor's empty throne. The humans did not destroy it. They occupied it. They landed peacefully. They announced that the war was over. They declared that the Varkan Empire was dissolved. They invited every conquered species to reclaim their freedom. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. Zolthrax received the news while floating above empty Earth. His face twisted with rage. His generals prepared for the long journey home. They calculated travel time. They planned assault strategies. But another message arrived before they could depart. The coalition had grown. Species that had feared the Varkan for millennia were rising up. Trade routes were being blocked. The supply lines were being cut. The Emperor's fleet was suddenly stranded, far from home, with enemies on every side. The humans had not just won a battle. They had changed the entire structure of galactic power. Zolthrax looked at the blue planet below him. He had come to crush an insect. Instead, he had awakened something ancient and hungry, something that had been waiting in the darkness between stars. Humanity had arrived, and they were not going back. The Galactic Council received the news with growing horror. Their laughter had faded. Their mockery had turned to ash. The primitives from the forgotten blue world had done the impossible. They had brought an empire to its knees in less than a year, and they were not finished yet. Emperor Zolthrax the Eternal faced the greatest decision of his ancient life. His fleet hung in orbit above Earth, a planet that had become a symbol of his humiliation. His empire crumbled behind him. His throne sat occupied by creatures he had dismissed as insects. His generals offered two options. They could return home and fight to reclaim their capital, or they could destroy Earth completely, erasing the source of their shame from existence. The Emperor chose destruction. If he could not have victory, he would have vengeance. His weapons officers began charging the planet killers. These were weapons so powerful that they had been used only twice in Varkan history. They could shatter a world into fragments. They could turn a living planet into a field of burning rocks, but the weapons never fired. Something emerged from behind Earth's moon. It was a ship unlike anything the Varkan had ever seen. It was massive, larger than any vessel in the Emperor's fleet. It was covered in designs that seemed to shift and change as they watched. The ship broadcast a message on all frequencies. The voice that spoke was human, but it carried a strange echo. It introduced itself as the Prometheus. Zolthrax demanded to know what trick this was. His sensors could not analyze the ship's construction. His weapons could not lock onto its hull. It seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, the Prometheus explained calmly. While the Varkan had been building empires and conquering galaxies, humans had been studying the universe. They had wondered about dark matter and quantum mechanics and the nature of reality itself. They had asked questions that other species considered pointless. Those questions had led to answers, and those answers had led to this ship. The Prometheus was built from materials that did not exist in normal space. Its engines bent the fabric of existence. Its weapons operated on principles that violated the laws of physics. The humans had not just caught up to galactic technology. They had leaped beyond it. Zolthrax ordered his fleet to attack. 30,000 ships unleashed their firepower at the single human vessel. Energy beams and missiles and torpedoes filled the void around it. The Prometheus absorbed everything. Its hull rippled like water accepting rain. Nothing touched it. Nothing damaged it. Then it responded. A single beam of white light swept across the Varkan fleet. Every ship it touched went silent. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Simply shut down. Systems died. Weapons failed. Life support continued, but nothing else worked. In seconds, the entire Imperial Armada was neutralized. Zolthrax floated in his dead command ship, surrounded by darkness. He had lived for 10,000 years. He had seen civilizations rise and fall. He had believed himself immortal and invincible. Now he understood the truth. His empire had been a child playing with toys. The humans had grown up differently. They had been forced to solve problems that the Varkan had never faced. They had been pushed to innovate by a universe that seemed determined to kill them, and they had succeeded. Human boarding parties secured the Emperor's ship. They treated him with respect. They did not torture him or humiliate him. They simply informed him that his reign was over. Zolthrax asked what would happen to his people. Would they be enslaved? Would they be exterminated? Would they face the same fate that they had inflicted on so many others? The humans told him no, that Varkan would be given a choice. They could join the coalition as equals. They could contribute their knowledge and resources to a new galactic community. They could help build something better than Empire. Or they could refuse and face isolation. Trade would stop. Communication would end. They would be alone in the universe, surrounded by species they had once conquered. It was not the punishment Zolthrax expected. It was worse. He had spent millennia defining his worth through power, through conquest, through domination. Now those things meant nothing. The humans had shown that a different path was possible, a path based on cooperation instead of conflict, a path that made his entire existence seem meaningless. The former emperor accepted the human terms. He had no other choice. Across the galaxy, the news spread like fire. The Varkan Empire had fallen. The emperor had surrendered. The humans and their coalition now controlled the largest territory in known space, the Galactic Council held another emergency session. This time, there was no laughter. There was no mockery. There was only fear. High Arbiter Vexus addressed the assembly with trembling words. The council had watched from the sidelines as a new power emerged. They had assumed the situation would resolve itself. They had believed their ancient civilizations were safe. They had been wrong. The humans sent an ambassador to the council. Her name was Dr. Sarah Oak. She was not a general or a warrior. She was a scientist, a diplomat, a grandmother. She addressed the assembly with quiet confidence. She explained humanity's intentions clearly. They did not want war. They did not want empire. They wanted something that had never existed in galactic history. They wanted peace. Real peace. Not the temporary pauses between conflicts that passed for peace among the stars. Not the forced submission that empires called stability. Actual, lasting, genuine peace. The council members shifted uncomfortably. Peace was a concept for the naive. Peace was what the weak asked for when they could not fight. Peace was impossible among so many different species with competing interests. Dr. Okonkwo smiled gently. She acknowledged their doubts. She admitted that peace was difficult. She agreed that it might take generations to achieve. But she reminded them of something important. Humans had been fighting among themselves for their entire history. They had invented war. They had perfected killing. They had built weapons that could destroy their own planet, and yet they still existed. Despite everything, they had found ways to work together. Despite all their differences, they had built a civilization that reached the stars. If humans could make peace among themselves, perhaps the galaxy could too. The council had no answer. They dismissed the ambassador with polite words and empty promises. They whispered among themselves about containing the human threat. But they all knew the truth. The galaxy had changed forever, that humans were here to stay, and nothing would ever be the same. 50 years passed since the fall of the Varkan Empire. The galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. Trade routes connected civilizations that had never known each other existed. Species that had fought for millennia now worked together on shared projects. The coalition had grown into something that defied all predictions. They called it the Unified Stellar Community. Its capital floated in neutral space, a massive station where representatives from thousands of worlds gathered. The station had been designed by human architects, built by Valari engineers, and decorated with art from every member species. At its center stood a monument, a simple blue sphere representing Earth. Around it orbited smaller spheres, representing every species that had joined the community. The monument was not about human superiority. It was about connection. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo had become the first human chancellor of the community. She served for 20 years before retiring. Now she lived quietly on a small moon, watching her grandchildren play in gardens filled with alien flowers. Former Emperor Zolthrax had taken a different path. He spent his remaining centuries teaching at human universities. He lectured about the dangers of empire. He warned young students about the corruption of power. He had become something he never expected. He had become wise. The Varkan people adapted slowly to their new reality. Some resented the changes. They remembered glory days when their species ruled the stars. They dreamed of revenge and restoration. But their children did not share these dreams. They grew up in a galaxy where cooperation was valued more than conquest. They made friends from other species. They learned that strength could mean building rather than destroying. The Galactic Council had dissolved itself. Its members recognized that their ancient institutions were relics of a different age. Some joined the unified stellar community willingly. Others watched from the edges, waiting to see what would happen. What happened was prosperity. Human technology spread throughout the galaxy. The Prometheus and its sister ships protected trade routes and responded to disasters. Human scientists collaborated with alien researchers on projects that advanced knowledge faster than ever before. Medicine improved dramatically. Diseases that had plagued species for millennia were cured. Lifespans extended. Suffering decreased. Art flourished. Human music blended with alien harmonies to create entirely new forms of expression. Literature crossed language barriers through advanced translation systems. Creativity became the most valued currency in the new economy. But not everything was perfect. The galaxy still faced challenges. Resources were sometimes scarce. Disputes arose between member species. Old hatreds simmered beneath the surface. The humans addressed these problems the same way they had addressed everything else, with patience, with creativity, with stubborn refusal to accept failure. They created new systems for resolving conflicts. They developed fair methods for distributing resources. They built institutions that balanced the interests of powerful species against the needs of weaker ones. Critics called them naive. Skeptics predicted collapse. Cynics waited for the humans to reveal their true nature as conquerors. None of these predictions came true. On the 50th anniversary of the Vulcan surrender, a great celebration filled the unified stellar community. Representatives from every member world gathered to mark the occasion. Speeches were delivered in 100 languages. Feasts featured food from 1,000 different cuisines. The keynote speaker was a young human woman named Maya Chen. She was the granddaughter of General Marcus Chen, who had led the first negotiations with Admiral Crick so long ago. Maya spoke about the meaning of the anniversary. She did not celebrate victory. She did not boast about human accomplishments. Instead, she talked about the future. She described challenges that still lay ahead. Unexplored regions of the galaxy held mysteries and dangers. Other civilizations existed beyond the community's borders, watching and waiting. The universe was vast and full of unknowns. But Maya expressed confidence that the community would face these challenges together. Not because humans were special, not because any single species had all the answers, but because they had learned something important. They had learned that the universe rewarded cooperation. They had learned that diversity was strength. They had learned that building was more satisfying than destroying. Her speech ended with a simple statement that would be quoted for centuries to come. When the celestial fleet arrived at Earth, the stars laughed. They thought they knew what would happen. They thought they understood the pattern of history. The strong conquered the weak. Empires rose and fell. Nothing ever really changed, but the stars had forgotten something. They had forgotten that patterns could be broken. They had forgotten that the future was not predetermined. They had forgotten that small things could create massive changes. Humanity had reminded them, and now, as the anniversary celebration continued into the night, as representatives from countless worlds danced and sang and laughed together, the stars watched in silence. They were not laughing anymore. They were learning. Somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, ancient beings observed these developments with great interest. They had watched civilizations rise and fall for billions of years. They had seen empires that made the Vulcan look insignificant. They had witnessed horrors and wonders beyond imagination. But they had never seen anything quite like this. A species had emerged from a small blue planet. It had faced extinction countless times. It had survived through determination and creativity and stubborn refusal to surrender. And then it had done something unprecedented. Instead of becoming conquerors, they had become builders. Instead of repeating the patterns of the past, they had created something new that the ancient watchers did not know if this experiment would succeed. The universe was harsh. History was long. Many things could still go wrong. But for the first time in eons, they felt something they had almost forgotten. They felt hope. The story of humanity was not finished. It was only beginning. Ahead lay adventures beyond counting, challenges beyond imagining, and discoveries that would reshape reality itself. But that is a tale for another time. For now, let us simply remember the lesson of the celestial fleet. The stars laughed at humanity. They thought we were weak. They thought we were primitive. They thought we would fall like all the others. They learned the truth: we endure, we adapt, we overcome, and we do it together.